Hello, everyone. Welcome to your second breakout session, Making Data Work for You. My name's John Monroe, and I'm the Director of Content at GovLoop. And for this session, I'm also your moderator. Thanks so much for joining me. So what'd you think about those lunch keynotes? There was some great food for thought. A thought about being innovative, about building a rewarding career in public service, and about relearning how to learn. If you missed out on those sessions, please be sure to catch up with it on demand. All right, but the good content keeps coming here and now. So let's get to it. As you all know, data-driven decision-making has become a priority at all levels of government. And it makes sense. The idea that if we have good data available, we should be using that to shape our decisions. But the problem is people can't make data-based decisions if they don't understand the data in front of them. That's why it's important to learn how to build your own data story and use that data story, use those visual and narrative techniques to help people make sense of data. So that's what we'll be talking about here today. But first, I need to go over some housekeeping items. And if you've been with us all day, these are going to sound very familiar. But if you're on Twitter, please do share what you learned. Just use the hashtag NextGenGov. You've heard it before, but we have some great resources available, including the slide deck that you're about to see. You can find those in the resource module on the right-hand side of your console, so be sure to check out what's there. Of course, we hope you don't have any technical difficulties, but if you do, just send us a message using that Q&A tab, and my colleague Jacqueline will help you out. And you can use that same tab to submit questions to our speaker, and we want your questions, so please don't be shy. And if you're not feeling shy, you can also engage with your fellow attendees. You can use that open chat. To access that, just click on the blue group chat button, which you'll find in the middle panel at the bottom of your screen. And just so you know, we are recording this event, and tomorrow we'll send you a link so that you can catch up on any of those sessions that you missed, like our great lunch keynotes, or you can watch some of your favorite sessions again. And finally, you can earn 1 CPE credit for participating in today's session. To get that credit, though, you need to do 3 things. First, participate in the entire session, so watch it from beginning to end. Second, take all the polls. And then third, fill out that post-event evaluation. That CPE evaluation form can be found in the resource module on the console, or if you need to fill it out later, you can find it in the resource center in the main environment. And all CPEs will be emailed to you directly once we've confirmed that you've met all those requirements. All right, with all that housekeeping out of the way, let me introduce you to our expert. Joining us today is Megan Huss. Megan is the Director of the Process and Performance Improvement Program at the Center for Leadership Development in the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. Megan helps public sector organizations with the development of process and performance improvement capabilities through training, workshops, and project-based learning initiatives. So Megan, without further ado, the floor is all yours.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, John. Thank you to everyone for joining us for this session today. As John mentioned, my name is Megan Huss, and I'm the Director of OPM's Process and Performance Improvement Program. And a little bit about kind of the linkage and the kind of desire to talk about data and how we can make it work for us comes from the fact that we oftentimes have these gaps between the practitioners and those that are making decisions based on our data. And so figuring out a way that we can bridge that gap and make those connections is really one of our primary objectives. So we like to focus on improving the efficiency, the effectiveness of organizations, and really understanding the root causes underneath kind of what the symptoms that we're seeing are. So today we'll be setting the stage for that and how we can convey that complex information in ways that ultimately support decision making and how we can utilize data storytelling. So with that, I'll start with our introduction and objectives for today. So we'll be covering 4 primary areas. One will be just learning about what data storytelling is and actually why we would want to be using it as individuals and in our organizations. The second objective is focusing on what the main components of data storytelling are. So as we look across the research and we look across different types of definitions and articles, we often see these similar themes begin to emerge. So we want to share those with you as kind of those core foundational elements. Then we'll talk through a bit about the process for actually building a data story of your own, and how this is something that it's a tool and technique that you can continue building on and actually take away and implement in your organization immediately. And last, we'll focus on how we can utilize data storytelling to actually drive decisions in our organization and how we can use that to support our efforts in that area. So I'm going to open up the chat now for everyone to talk to kind of what data storytelling or even storytelling means to you. When that phrase is mentioned, what comes to mind? I'll do a quick check with our back-end technical experts. Do we have the chat fully open? Okay. Graphics. Thinking about the cause and effect, exactly. How we paint the picture. So what context does our data fit within? Exactly. Examining our null hypotheses or alternates. Visualization, making it understandable. So really reaching our target audience. Revealing something we don't know. That's a really important component of this. So looking at what themes start to emerge, even examining maybe some biases that we didn't realize were in place, only to figure those out after we look at this visually. Creating that snapshot. So how we can capture the audience quickly and be able to convey a significant fact, something of significant meaning without actually kind of diving into the entire story. Presenting data in a way that the audience can understand. Very good. So really looking at kind of one of the themes that's coming up within this chat is actually relatable, right? Is the audience. So really knowing who we're targeting, because the same data story would not be applicable, from one organization to the next, or even one audience or one target demographic group to the next. So looking at who we're trying to reach and how we're trying to kind of meet them where that understanding is at. Great. Well, thank you all for popping some messages into the chat, and we'll continue to use this throughout this session so that we can have an interactive, collaborative session about kind of what you bring to the table in terms of your current understanding, as well as some ideas that you might take from not only the webinar content information, but also from your peers. So now we're going to move to the next question, thinking about how would you use, or how do you currently use storytelling in your day-to-day work? Is this something that you use? And if so, how do you see that being used? And it doesn't even have to be the data storytelling element, but just really storytelling. So as we wait for some of the thoughts to start to come in from the audience, one of the things that comes to mind for me is if I think about how I would want to convey something that took place. So I'm conveying a fact that all of my team members attended a recent first go at a DEIA symposium. So I could either tell you that fact, tell you that 100% attended, or I could tell you something that because the entire team attended, that they've taken away some key fact that they're actually implementing into our weekly routine and into something that we now treat as a standard practice. So really thinking about, what our objective is. So the facts haven't changed, but in a way that would make it either relatable or a way that it would be more remarkable or more notable to your audience. Exactly. So messaging and campaigns, when we're touting those accomplishments, or we're thinking about our strategic initiatives and priorities, how might we convey that in a more effective manner? telling stories in comparison of something that I've done. How functions play a role in the lives of individuals. Exactly. So linking that, utilizing metrics, but actually linking them to that ultimate impact and outcome. It's a wonderful way to convey the environment that we're operating in, right? So we have the black and white data facts, but we'd also see, significant benefit by actually adding that personal experience, adding the emotion, some of those elements that get at individuals' feelings and emotions. Great. So we are going to move right into the next slide. Thank you for all your input here. And that's the focus on really what is data storytelling. And so I had mentioned this earlier. I just pulled in 3 quotes that kind of represent what data storytelling is. You can find hundreds, if not thousands, of explanations, definitions, all of that, online just by a quick search. But one of the things that I wanted to share with you all is really examining kind of what themes start to emerge when we look across that spectrum of definitions, when we look across the research and what that is all saying kind of together and those commonalities. And one of the key things that you'll see is that linkage between the metrics and the environment. So how we actually place our data, how we place our results, our findings within the context that it actually takes place. Another element that's key to and common across the spectrum of definitions is insights. So this was a great thought that someone had put in the chat earlier, but really trying to understand what the data means and then figuring out a way to depict that, to share that with a specific audience. So that's another key element as we look at the definitions for what really is data storytelling. And then, of course, that element of the visualization. So a way that we may only have an audience for a split second, they may even only have 3 seconds. And how can we convey an important component or characteristic of that data set or those findings in that very short time period? So let's think about some of those real life examples that we all have. Think about where either in the private sector or public sector organizations that they've used data storytelling effectively. So if we think about those things that we use on a daily basis, how many out there have iWatches, right? So the fitness component of that, the 3 circles, thinking about things like that convey our data in a very concise, easy to look at way so that at a quick glance, you can tell, okay, I've only got half my exercise minutes in for today. I need to obviously add in another workout at the end of the day. Or maybe it's something like credit scores. So many organizations like credit cards offer the free credit monitoring, the free credit status updates in their apps. And just by a quick glance, you can see easily if you're in the red, you're in the green, kind of where you fall in comparison to so many others. Oh, great example. So thinking about our phone apps and the summaries that we receive from those. So thinking about Spotify and the music app, and them just sending us kind of messages about, what our utilization was. But instead of that being just the facts, it's actually kind of putting us in the center of that story. So thinking about, bravo, you were one of the individuals that followed this new up and coming artist, in the first portion of their career. So it makes you feel like you are somehow that leader. There's also other public sector examples, like if we think about the CDC, right? So how many statistics do we have available related to COVID, related to hospitalizations or vaccinations, and really thinking about how we can convey that quickly, because oftentimes people will only pay attention for a very short period. And then also looking at what kind of our objective is for that, right? So there's a clear objective to either inform the audience or to move individuals to action. And so there's so many examples that we have about across both the private and public sectors. Think about birth rates and those kind of statistics that we take a look at. Census data, that's great. Absolutely. And then we can slice and dice that in a number of ways and portray that visually very easily by either the small people bodies and arranged in a different format. And there's many ways to kind of shape that in terms of reaching various audiences. TikTok algorithms, absolutely. Thinking about immigration rates, certainly, and how we would want to portray that. And then thinking about kind of the objectives of who we're trying to reach in those data stories and kind of how they're framed in that regard. So I think many folks probably have the stock market app on their phone and have been watching that closely recently. So that's just another example of taking a quick look at something that tells you quite a large story simply by one or two graphics. Exactly, student data. So enrollment, assessments, graduation rates, great thoughts. So now we're going to move. We've talked a little bit about kind of what data storytelling is. We have some terrific examples in the chat from everyone, what this looks like in both the public sector and the private sector. And so we're going to shift now to talk about kind of the most important component of today's webinar. And that's really why you should care about data storytelling. So we often learn about new things. We learn about the what. We learn about what is taking place. But this is really critical to really dig into and understand the why behind the utilization and why this might be an effective tool to add to your toolkit. So let's move to the audience now and talk a little bit about why you think data storytelling is so effective. We went through some great examples in the private sector as well as public sector examples. And so thinking through some of those that you've either experienced yourself or have ideas now that you've seen them in the chat, what are some reasons that data storytelling might be effective? Why should we be using it? Great. It's easy to read. It's easy to understand for various audiences. It can be quickly tailored for unique audiences and for individuals. Visual and relatable. It's much quicker to get the information. That's a big driver of why this is so effective, because we can lose audiences so quickly. So just having that quick snapshot of the most critical point that you'd like to share from the data set. Exactly, eliminating the noise. That's one of the most common things that we encounter is the availability of significantly large data sets, and even the analyses that are conducted is tremendous. However, the most important piece to driving towards action is distilling that down to the message, the specific areas that people need to focus on to be able to move forward with a target action. Conveying a stronger message. Exactly, highlighting those important points. So as we mentioned, reducing the noise that everyone feels from kind of this constant information overload, and really focusing in on those key components or that key element of the analysis, the outcome, the insight that was derived from the work that was done in the data, and then being able to share that in a concise manner. Can make boring data more exciting. I like that. So those of us that love data, sometimes we lose sight of the fact that it's not that intriguing to everyone. So I like that. That's a great point. It's a form of keeping up with technology. Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you everyone for your input here. Those are some really good insights and thoughts. So now we're going to talk about some of those key components. And I think some of you have touched on a few of these, but really focusing on why this works. So if you're thinking about kind of how we stay relevant and how we may upskill our workforce, or how we may learn new things, it's not necessarily about a full career transition or taking a different turn or a different direction, but rather building on what we've already learned, building on our formal education and adding to that. And so this is one of those tools that we're really able to utilize for that purpose. So think about those times that we've actually spent a significant amount of time in the data, been very responsible, taken ethical approaches to the analyses, and thought we presented a phenomenal chart that depicted that, or possibly it was a lengthy report that we shared with many, and it was only to be met with, "That's nice," or we have requests now for more data because we didn't understand, or there may be more confusion around the topic, and so it just kind of stagnates and nothing moves forward. So that's one of the key reasons that this is so effective, is that we're actually able to share not just the what's happening, like that report or that flat graphic might be, but we're able to convey more about the why, and kind of unpacking and creating that story around what that actual data or that fact says. So data in itself holds tremendous potential value, but that's really the key there, is it's the potential value, because until we create that bridge and make that linkage of how we're utilizing that and how we can drive decisions and encourage action from that data, it really in and of itself would just be that potential value. So thinking about TED Talks, right? The slogan of ideas worth spreading. An analysis of the most popular 500 TED Talks actually said that stories were comprised at least 65% of their content. So that alone tells you that, we think about some of our favorite talks that we've listened to, or those things that really resonate with us, and those kind of learning tips and tools and techniques that we've taken away, that we really are able to retain that information and integrate it into our lives because it was told in a story fashion, as opposed to those more flat facts and stats. So it really capitalizes on our brain's preference for stories. We're able to transform and actually create that bridge between our metrics, between our statistics, to that potential future action. And then this was a point that one of the attendees had actually noted earlier, is that it simplifies complex information. So not everyone wants to take days to dive into a large data set or even run their own analyses, but they want to know what the highlights are, what insights can be drawn from the work that's been done. And so data storytelling is a quick, concise way to do that. And it actually energizes people to take action. So we were talking about the potential value in data in and of itself. With the addition of the storytelling, that's really one way that we're able to add significant value and drive that towards impact and outcomes. So thinking about why storytelling works, let's think about this career field. And I'd like everyone to weigh in the chat box for how much you think the data science career field has grown over the last 5 years. Two times. 100%, exponentially. That's a very safe and effective answer. 100%, 500%, doubled, tripled, 150%. Immensely, a lot, exactly. So I think that we all have that impression that this field in general is growing significantly. And that's one of the takeaways that I'd like to share in these types of talks, is that it actually doesn't require a full pivot of your career field, of your career direction, but rather these are skills that all of us as a process improvement practitioner, as an HR specialist, as a management analyst can add to our tool belt to actually be more effective in our current and future roles. So we looked at a couple of organizations. For example, Glassdoor had noted that this career field had grown 500% in the last 5 years, just with the significant number of new job openings. So we look at kind of data scientists, and that actually ranks as number 3 in the top 50 occupations. And data science isn't new to the industry, but it's actually starting to form kind of its own following and its own area, because we're able to focus in on some of those skills that I mentioned that can be learned in addition to your current role, and it's not something that requires a complete pivot. So thank you for all your thoughts. And now we're actually going to talk a little bit about why it's effective. We've talked about why it's effective, and so we'll move towards how we go about building that data story. So really what the main components are of building a data story. So what are your thoughts on how you would go about building an effective data story? You can go ahead and pop those into the chat box. What are those main elements that we can't live without? Oh, Leslie, I love that. The team is proposing intro to statistics. Obtaining data and then analyzing it. Exactly. Identifying what we need. So sifting through those significant data pools. The pre and the after, so setting the context for where this data sits and what the analyses might reveal. Getting the data, analyzing it, making it understandable and interesting if at all possible. Great. Interpreting data in meaningful ways. So making sure that we're actually creating that linkage between the results and the analyses and the individuals. Developing charts, graphs, right? So how do we depict this? Being intentional about the diversity of data collected. Exactly. So now we are flipping to the next slide, which is the 3 main components of data storytelling. And you'll see this depicted in a wide variety of ways across the research and the literature as well. But some of the things that consistently stand out are these 3 key elements that we can't have a true data story without including these. So the first is actually our data and our data analysis. So really understanding what the data is telling us and the interpretation, conducting the analyses, and then applying our own industry and our own organization's standards for ethical interpretation, for ensuring that we are examining this data first before we're creating the story. We never want to fit kind of the data into the story that we're trying to portray. So really doing a good job on the front end of taking a look at the data and what that might mean with various analyses. Then looking at the narrative and the storyline that we want to include. So this is a key element for kind of how we take the individuals and the audience along the journey with us, how we convey kind of where this came from, why it was even collected, those important components, and then share that in a concise manner that portrays the full story. So as we know, we can oftentimes slice and dice data in a certain way to kind of depict a certain outcome or to maybe highlight one certain element, that's not a fair representation of the full data set or the full data story. So really taking a look at how we can convey that entire storyline or that journey in an effective manner, in a way that is being true to the findings of our results and our analyses. And then, of course, we have the visualizations as well. So I wanted to highlight the 3 components here to ensure that everyone kind of looks at this as key elements that all have to be included for effective data storytelling. So sometimes folks, kind of when you just start to think about data story, it might just bring to mind that visual or that graphic. But we really want to emphasize the important element of creating that storyline and ensuring that we're conveying the context that our data sets actually sit within. So the visualization is an important component, but it's one of 3 important components here. So looking at how we might spot trends, how we might see patterns that begin to emerge is also a key element of utilization of visualizations, even before it's to the point of presenting, but even just within our own teams. So what are some ways that you can think of to actually simplify charts and graphs for better data visualization? Great. Pinpointing exactly what we're trying to highlight exactly. Removing the fluff or the noise, whichever word you prefer to use. Really showcasing the key elements that are critical to either driving that decision, prompting someone to take action, simplify. Ensuring you're choosing the right visual to go along with your data story. Utilizing clear labels. Exactly. If the visual that we are using is not quick and easy to understand, then we're simply adding more noise and confusion. Simple colors, right? So we've often seen a variety of colored charts, graphs that may or may not have anything to do with the actual data or kind of the story that's being told. And if that's the case, we want to simplify those. And presenting it in a basic way for your unique audience. I think that's one of the key takeaways here is that a data story will not be effective. It's not a one size fits all. So really understanding what your audience needs are and what their level of understanding is, and then tailoring to that particular audience. Great. And then really, again, with the tailoring to your audience, making sure that they understand the linkage, either the impact or the potential action that they could take, even if it wasn't related to the larger outcome, how this might relate to them. Utilizing less colors, background effects. Yes, 508 compliance, absolutely. Speaking to the right audience, so layman's terms versus novice level of understanding. So with that, we've talked about the key elements to data storytelling, ways that we can simplify some of those charts, graphs for better understanding and visualization. And now we're going to move into actually starting to build that data story. So what ideas do you have about the best place to start? We'll have you pop those into the chat. kind of what your thoughts are around how you could effectively tell a data story. Absolutely. What's your goal out of creating this data story? After, utilizing this data, conducting your analyses, and then reporting your results, where do you want to go with it from there? What's the objective? What are you trying to accomplish? Understanding the ask. So the ask may have been, simply to analyze the data, create a report, but then really thinking strategically about what value that's adding and how we can move that from the potential value of the data or the report in and of itself to the actual captured value with movement towards action or decision. Identifying the problem and potential solution that the data may provide insights for. Understanding the goal, the objectives, where we're trying to go with this data story. And it might not be singular, it might be more of a data novel that we get to with a variety of stories within. But looking at what the audience's biases are. Exactly, do they have preconceived ideas? Are we, kind of up against a group that may be trying to go a particular direction and utilize the data for that purpose? So really having a solid understanding of where people are trying to go with the data, and then how we can best utilize that to tell the true story of the data and the insights drawn from it. So with that, we are going to move to our next slide of actually building the data story. So looking at how we go about that, considering that, we would begin with that initial question. So looking at what we are trying to address, how we are trying to uncover insights from the data, and then really being able to communicate that and deriving that value that the data holds. So it represents, this is an exciting new field and kind of that point where art and science really meet if we think about data storytelling. So the importance of sound statistical techniques, analyses, even cleaning our data, and as well as the partnership between how do we explain that to others? How do we reach the particular audience that we're focused on? So really beginning with that critical question, and how we can continue to make improvements as well in our organizations utilizing this data. So looking at, our skilled data storytellers, for example, they're able to utilize this effective technique, utilize graphics, but most importantly out of that, and thinking about building our data story, they're really able to distill down to the most critical components of the data insights and what we want to share. So not conveying all of it, not having kind of a lot of background noise going on, but really having that concise story and message. So as we move from kind of beginning with our question, what we're asking of the data, or what we're being asked to present, or what story this may be related to, then we move into really understanding who the audience is and then adjusting to meet that. So, whether this is a highly technical audience or this is an audience with less of an understanding around this area. Maybe it's an audience of a variety of leadership team members. So really thinking about kind of who the audience is, what our question is, or what we're trying to achieve there, and then conveying the information based on that. So creating that storyline, setting the stage for the journey of the data, as well as kind of the question that we're asking. So looking at the setting the stage and describing the context for the surrounding elements of that data set and the insights that we've drawn. So helping to convey the full picture in a concise manner. And then being clear with our descriptions and utilizing less language if that's a more effective solution, and really being sure that we are ending this with that option, those potential solutions that are that we're able to take action on from that data story. So ensuring that it's really that kind of impassioned call to action for others, right? How can we achieve that impact from the data, from the results, as well as the data story? So looking at, reducing jargon, unnecessary acronyms, making sure that that is all aligned with the particular audience that you're addressing. And then, of course, not overloading. So we want to provide the context, that story of the journey where the data sits, without actually providing all the data, without overloading the audience with too much that's unnecessary for them to actually make decisions and move forward. So now that we've talked through the process of how you would go about building a data story, what are your ideas for how we can better understand our various stakeholders and how we could adjust to that audience? Exactly. So using interviews, we could address groups with surveys, making sure that we're understanding what they actually want from this data set. Clearly identifying whether it's a technical audience or non-technical. Using appropriate language to meet the audience where they're at. Yes. And really trying to put yourself in their shoes, thinking about their current role, what objectives they may have for utilizing the data, for understanding the data, and trying to meet that. Exactly, voice of the customer. Conducting those stakeholder analyses. This may be findings from a particular data set that would be best and most appropriately kind of built into 2-3 data stories that can be targeted at the various audiences, depending on what their level of need is, what questions they're asking of the data, and what call to action might be most relevant to them. So now we're going to move into thinking about how we can better understand our stakeholders, how we actually move them to action, and how we support making decisions. So what are some thoughts or ideas you have around that area? Yes, assessing and understanding experiences, where our stakeholders are coming from. Going that step further from the analysis to the results to the data story, and then actual potential solutions that can result from that, something that we use frequently as a process improvement practitioner, and proposing what those next steps are, what that solution might look like, and kind of creating those various scenarios. Better policy and practice solutions. So utilizing the data to tell that story about how we might actually propose changes to the policy or our processes and what that would look like. Great. Thank you all for your input into the chat. So now we're moving into what we had just used the chat for, to brainstorm around how we can utilize data to tell a story. We're trying to support decision making. We're trying to move that to action so that we're actually able to see results and see the impact and that realized value from the data set. So the reality really is that if our data isn't understood, it won't be compelling. And if it's not compelling, then that next step is we won't be able to see the impact of that change. So really focusing on kind of that core element of understanding, knowing the audience, doing your stakeholder analysis, voice of the customer, really clearly identifying who we're targeting for that, and then moving to that emotional linkage of, it's out of our head in terms of the just mind knowledge, and moving to our hearts of, what makes people act, what makes them jump out of bed in the morning. So focusing on those things that are essential and have that emotional connection. We like to think about some of the areas around supporting key decision making. One of the key elements that we've noted here on the slide is providing the context. So really understanding, if you're submitting this report, or if this is something that you've been asked to, conduct an analysis on, and you're not exactly sure where it will be going, and so you haven't been able to fully mature your data story around this, really trying to provide key elements of the context to those you're working with, because those are such important elements in making an informed decision based on the data, is understanding where that data sits in the larger picture. So creating that kind of bulleted, concise list of how where the data sits in, and then those recommendations for future action or decision. And then this relates to something that we've brought up a couple of times, but really eliminating the noise to the greatest extent we can. And that's related to kind of our data initially, the analyses that are conducted, the insights that are drawn, as well as looking at the story and the narrative that we're telling around the actual data, and really ensuring that this is targeted to the decision that we're trying to support being made, or the audience that we're trying to inform or help create that understanding. And then looking at really sharing insights and making sure that the key stakeholder groups are aware of kind of those other elements that may be related, may not be a direct part of this current data story, but that may be strategically aligned to it, so that we're painting that full picture in the most concise manner. So we have another great comment in the chat about ensuring that the data is organized in a way that can empower people to make the change. So I think this was something that a great comment that came up before, is really being able to identify, who your audience is, what level of change they may be able to enact, or the potential solutions they could implement. And then even if that's not the largest picture of the data story, really figuring out how to make that relatable and how this can kind of drive their future actions. Creating those linkages is powerful. And it really can level the playing field, absolutely, when we can create that shared understanding of not only the terminology, but also of the data, of the insights that have been drawn from it, to really help a wider audience of individuals be able to weigh in with their opinions and their experiences. So with that, we are going to move into our review and wrap up section. And we have a few poll questions lined out here that we'll move into. And as John had mentioned, I believe for your participation and your full engagement today, both in the chat and then in these upcoming poll questions, that will be what allows them to issue those continuing education credits. So we really encourage you all to participate. I think the more individuals that we get to weigh in here, the more interesting kind of the results are. So the first question that we're moving to is how we actually, let's see, sorry, I can't see the question. It's not on my screen.
Oh, sorry. Why does data storytelling work?
Okay.
And so the options are: it capitalizes on the brain's preference for stories over data. It transforms metrics and statistics into relatable stories. It simplifies complex information. It energizes people to take action, or all of the above. So give everyone a chance to make their choice. So Megan, while they're doing that, I'm curious, how did you get interested in data? How did this become, a passion for you?
Sure. So my background in my formal education is actually in industrial organizational psychology. So my first ever government project was developing competency models. And so I had kind of had the data bug from my background. But one of the things that I saw as I moved through different roles and different parts of the organization in like leading workforce and succession planning, various areas, is that I eventually saw this kind of great fit between the actual data analysis and the IO background and process improvement, and how we can continuously make ourselves better, and then really utilizing data to drive those solutions and those decisions. So this is kind of where I got to it at this point in my career, with understanding the importance of bridging that between the hard data science side and the actual decision-making, kind of reporting, data storytelling side. So that's just a little bit about my background and how I became interested in this area.
Very cool. Well, the results are in, and a few answers scattered here and there, but by far, good 95% people said all of the above.
Well done. So we have a number of individuals that were listening carefully today.
That's right. All right. Shall we go to the next one?
Let's do.
All right. What are the three main components of all data stories? Obtaining/analyzing data, cleaning the data and developing narrative. That's one. Obtaining/analyzing data, developing a narrative and creating visualizations is two. Or three, obtaining data, analyzing data, and presenting the data. So pop quiz, folks. Let's see what you learned here today. So Megan, while people are answering, what do I know there's some people who just don't like data. They don't want to see an Excel spreadsheet. They just, how do you talk to them and help them see that, this is something they need to really understand and that they can understand it?
Sure. I think one of the important elements of that is if we think about where our stories typically come from and what we talk about on a daily basis, it's oftentimes embedded in data, whether that's quantitative or qualitative data. And so really kind of taking a backwards look at that of, everything that we do involves some type of data. And so really looking at how we bridge that gap between the results, the impact, the effectiveness, and the analyses that are being conducted. So I think there's an opportunity for individuals from any discipline and kind of any industry to be involved in this area, in this field, because we do have that perfect combination of the art and science.
Okay. And let's see the results. The majority of folks picked number two, obtaining, analyzing data, developing a narrative, and creating visualizations.
All right. So well done, everyone. This was the correct answer that the majority selected. However, I will say this was a bit of a tricky question because the data cleaning is important as well. So looking at that kind of being a part of the obtaining, analyzing data, we actually want to ensure that we have that narrative component. So we talked about those three pieces, and that if we just jump to the visualization, we're actually missing such an important opportunity to make this data relatable and understandable to a variety of audiences. And then if we just focus on kind of the data, right? So obtaining it, collecting it, analyzing it, cleaning it, and then presenting that flat report, if you will, we're also not able to kind of achieve the results that we would otherwise be able to if we had other visualizations or additional narrative to help drive decisions from it. So
Excellent.
Well done, everyone.
All right, so we just got a couple minutes left. Let's see if we can get to the last couple questions. Where do we start when building a story? Identify and understand the stakeholders, develop insights, solutions, and options, create visualizations, identify a question or issue. So go ahead and select your choices there, what you think is right.
And this should be a fairly quick one.
Yeah. What we might do is just stop after the next question, since we are running out of time, and that should be no problem.
Sure.
We'll take care of people.
All right. Shall we go to displaying the results for this one?
Let's see. And so, so 25.6% said identify and understand the stakeholders. The second most the most popular choice was identify a question or issue.
Exactly. And so the audience got that one correct as well. These are all important components to making your data story, but really identifying what we're trying to solve for initially is that most important piece. I think we had a couple of scientists in our group as well that identified, the null and the hypotheses.
All right. Well, we are out of time, and but Megan, thank you so much for this wonderful session. I know that this is something that we all need to get better at, and so really appreciate you sharing these insights. I also want to thank our 2022 NextGen Tech Alliance partners for helping us put on today's NextGen Summit, but we're not done yet. So first, let me offer a few quick reminders. Don't forget to fill out your CPE evaluation form so that you can get your credit. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to head over to the exhibit hall. Check out our amazing booths where there's lots of additional information, lots of good resources. So here's what's happening next. Our closing session will begin at 3 p.m. Eastern, so that's just about in 15 minutes. You can access that session through the conference hall in the main environment, and there's going to be 2 keynote presentations as part of this closing session. The first is confront and eliminate unconscious bias in the workplace. So obviously this is a really critical issue, that we're all really kind of focused on at this point. And the second is networking, what you're doing wrong and what you must start doing today. So another very good session. So thank you all for attending, and we'll see you overall in the closing session.